Yeah, I wonder if I could make a fairly extended response. I think in this lecture and in the next one, you do a superb job of pointing out just how radical your thought really is. If you picked the central ideas of modern philosophy, hit correctly, what are the biggest, most important ideas that people have had that framed our way of thinking about things? The notion of representing reality and the notion of conscious experience would probably be a big two that we've used. And you suggested that, you argued in detail that they're just a bad idea, something that a stage perhaps we needed to go through, but something that, having fought the battles that we've fought with them now, we should see as wrong turns, or at the very best, as ladders that we should kick away, having climbed up on them. And have spent some decades now teaching us a language that would let us get along without those ideas and distinguish ourselves thereby very radically from the way essentially everybody has thought for the last 350 years. This I know is what John and I find so stimulating about your work, that this is an intellectually heroic effort. I think you placed us properly as less radical, less bold, perhaps by degrees. That is, I'm willing to throw one of those ideas overboard, conscious experience, sentience, but want to hold on to the notion of representing how things are in a suitably sanitized form, where sanitized means trying to take account of just the sorts of criticisms of the mistaken elements of that tradition that you pointed out. John McDowell wants to keep both of them in suitably sanitized versions, again, trying to take account of the sorts of criticisms that you pointed out. I think that is pretty much where we sit, and from a metaphilosophical point of view, as began to come out yesterday, the issue is one of tactics, I think, rather than even of strategy, how to deal with certain dangers that we recognize, how to keep from falling off certain conceptual precipices. And John and I think that in each of these regards, having diagnosed the dangers, you want to build the fence too far back, anyway, unnecessarily far back from the edge of the precipice. So why should we let people walk that close to the edge? Now that we see how likely you are to fall off, let's put the fence back here. And we're suggesting, well, it's possible to walk a little bit closer to the edge than that here. Look, there's a path along here that we can have. From that point of view, I think we want to claim, well, we're being bold too. We're saying, look, you don't need the belt and suspenders here. We don't need to build the fence a half mile from the precipice. We can come in here a little closer. John makes me nervous walking right along the edge, though he can do it. He doesn't fall off, but I hesitate the liability of other people falling off makes me nervous. To open it to the general public, that path seems dangerous to me. To alter the image so as not to be completely invidious it's as though we had all seen the ravages of alcoholism, and John and I were recommending, well, still social drinking is all right. You know, a glass of wine with dinner won't hurt anyone. And from that point of view, we would see you in the guise of the rabid Alcoholics Anonymous, who says, no, alcoholism is so bad, admit, you representationalists, you fans of conscious experience, that you've been on a bender for 350 years. You are an alcoholic. The fact that occasionally you can keep from drinking doesn't keep you from being a representationalist, experientialist alcoholic. One drink is more dangerous than you can allow yourself, and sees as a counsel of just as a foolish counsel, given the nature of the disease, the sort of halfway points that John and I are recommending. So, I very much admire the setting out of the issues and the tactical and strategic sort of considerations. And I think we're all looking at the same abyss, worried about the same sort of alcoholism there, and really do have intramural disagreements. Having said that, let me make a plea for my particular program of social drinking. The rehabilitation of pale versions of representation and facts. I think you're right that people like Searle and Devitt and even Rorty are going to be disappointed and think that I'm trying to foist something off on them that isn't the real thing that they want. I think that's inevitable if and insofar as one acknowledges the dangers of that way of talking. They really want the whole bad thing that they're going to plunge into the abyss. So the question is, though, whether it's worth even having even this attenuated version. And it seems to me that it is. Of course, one might swallow the paradox about truth that you talk about at the end. But I don't think there's any reason at all to do it. It's what one gains by that is just not very much, because there is a perfectly safe way of talking in the vicinity. On the subject of claimables, I accept your point about normative powers. One would want a theory of such things. We now have theories of normative powers that professionals who do those. And I think that I have given a story about claimables, about how we can talk about them in terms of our practices of claiming, in terms ultimately of our practices of giving and asking for reason, that is in good social pragmatist terms. I think I've specified what it is for us to confer claimable content on some noise that we make or some move that we make in this practice. So I don't think it is an old-fashioned, an 18th century normative power type explanation. I think it's more like a contemporary pharmacologist. Let me tell you about normative powers. That is what's in there. Here are the 6 versions of them. Here's how they go. The large terms in which you frame this, I think, are particularly helpful. You say, well, none of us should be frightened by notions of what we're talking over about. Sellars taught us how to domesticate doves, or how to understand them as tame. Those are just meta-linguistic, semantic discourse as applied to our discourse. It's a way we talk about our talk. That's, as it were, ordinary language talk. We talk not only about what we're saying, but I'd say I'm giving a theory of when I talk about the attainable, but also what we're talking about or what we're thinking. And that's harmless. But there are then these philosophers typed up versions, notions of representation, of reference, of answering to how things are, being responsible to how things are, acknowledging the authority of how things are. That's a theoretical philosopher's accretion, and that's what we should throw overboard, but keep the notions of ofness or aboutness, and that's going to keep us away from the authoritarianism that you're properly warning us against. Well, I both think that it's more difficult than you're acknowledging to have the one set of words without having the other. That is, that there's going to be a set of easy steps that takes you from talk about ofness and aboutness to talk about answering to. That's going to generate a paradox structurally very similar to the one about ancient truths and ancient facts that we were talking about. And that, in fact, a suitably sanitized version of where that argument ends us up isn't something that we need to be frightened about. What do we mean when we talk about what we're talking about or what we're thinking of? If I say, the person in our train compartment on the way out who doesn't read French is a fine guitar player. And now suddenly you realize, well, I don't know who he's talking about. Which person is that? Now that's, I take it, still the ordinary language version. That's the context in which worrying about what we're talking about comes up. Well, it's when we say, so which one am I talking about as the person in the train compartment who doesn't read French? Why do I want to know that? What am I asking when I ask that? Well, I'm asking if the issue comes up of whether I should endorse this claim that person is a fine guitar player, for whatever practical reason, which individual should I investigate? Which object in the train compartment should I consult in deciding whether to endorse that claim? Which object in the train compartment is it that my endorsement answers to, or that I'm responsible to if I'm obliged to defend my endorsement of that claim? It seems to me that the move from who do I investigate, or what do I investigate in order to decide what to endorse? What do I consult? What does my endorsement answer to? Or what's it responsible to when the issue of entitlement comes up? It seems to me that though there may be a progression through those, it's an easy and natural progression. I'm not sure just at which stage you want to get off. It's more highfalutin to talk about what my endorsement is responsible to or answerable to than it is to talk about what object I investigate. It's less loaded to talk about what object I consult, but the consultation is already a kind of acknowledgement of the authority of. When I consult the doctor, it's because I expect to get an authoritative statement from the doctor. Maybe not absolutely authoritative, but relatively so. And it seems to me that we needn't build any more into the notion of responsibility to and answerability to. That is already in the notion of which object do I investigate, which thing do I consult in deciding whether to endorse this claim. So that when you say, so I think that there's a progression there that one could decide by fiat, well, I'll use this much language but not the rest of it. You could stop there, but I think it's hard to motivate out of our ordinary talk a stopping place there. At the end, I think you've got the sense of responsible to that I see in Kant. At any rate, the insight that's in Kant, when he says that in a judgment there's two aspects of its form. There's the I think, the emptiest of all representations that can accompany all of our representations. That's a matter of who's responsible for the claim. And then there's the object equals X, the thing that the claim is responsible to, the way it points beyond itself. That's the objective dimension of the form of the claim. It seems to me we see those as parts of the form. The idea that judgments are things we're responsible for, and there's somebody who's responsible for them. And in making a judgment, one is opening oneself up to, acknowledging the things we're talking about as having a certain authority over them. As we can be wrong, and the things we're talking about are the ones that are going to settle whether we're wrong. Not outside, not as norms outside of our practices, but part of what we're doing in the practices is giving them that sort of authority. That doesn't seem to be an unpragmatist picture. If we saw them as sitting in judgment from outside the practices, fine, but this is an authority that we grant them in making claims that whether our endorsement is right or not, whether we can become entitled to it, depends on how things are with these things. That's part of what we're committing ourselves to. That seems to be a perfectly acceptable picture for a pragmatist. So it seems to me both that it's harder to make the distinction between of and about and a technical philosopher's representation and responsibility to than you let on, and that there's less cost in doing so than you're inclined to think, and so less reason to make this one of the paradoxes that we swallow hard and take. We could go that way. We're talking about a balance of considerations, but that's why that's what seems to be speaks for the equilibrium that I suggested, and not the hideously dangerous one that John is suggesting, which we'll talk about this afternoon. Sorry.
Yeah, in your reference to Kant, it leads me along the following line of thought. Kant, many people have pointed out that Kant seems always to have thought in juridical terms. It was as if, he were a lawyer first. Well, I mean, he wasn't biographically, but it's as if he came to philosophy out of law. And this notion of giving authority to things and then having responsibility to them once we've given them the authority, as if nature the world were a bunch of people who had been assigned status by a legal system, reminds me of Nietzsche's claim that the notion of substance was originally the notion of subject, that the notion of a thing which it is our duty to know was originally the notion of a person whom it is our duty to deal with. And I suppose the drift of what I'm suggesting is that we, make a really sharp distinction between the kind of relations we have to human beings and the kinds that we have to anything that isn't a human being, and that you and Kant are suggesting that we sort of populate the world with honorary quasi-persons, which are, so to speak, our creations by virtue of our legal social practices, but once they are so created, they have the rights our pets have, so to speak, or our clients or something. And when I put it like that, I can't quite see why I'm getting so exercised about, frigidly refusing to anthropomorphize in your and Kant's way, and frigidly refusing to grant tables and planets and numbers authority, answerability to, and stuff like that, what harm can it do? And then I think, well, it did do harm, and that the harm it did was to give us a sense of responsibility to things not ourselves, because we were unable to forget that we were the source of that responsibility, that it was our legal system, so to speak, that gave them the rights that they are now claiming. I found what you said very illuminating. I don't know how to argue the question of whether to sort of let in the rest of the universe as quasi-people in this way of the transcendental object equaling X being a quasi-person which has rights and responsibilities in the way in which the transcendental subject has rights and responsibilities, whether to go along with that or sort of in a sort of frenzied exaltation of the uniqueness of the human species, insist on, never using any vocabulary used of a human about anything non-human. I suppose what this anti-authoritarianism stuff amounts to is that kind of frenzied exaltation, saying that, we human beings are so wonderful or so distinctive, or we so much need to cling together that we must not create any quasi-human what's-this to confuse us. Put like that, it seems a little, why am I saying this? And it seems a fruitful set of metaphors under which to discuss the topic, but it doesn't leave me any surer which side to come down on. I guess my first inclination was to say this bit about ascribing answerability to, responsibility to, authority to an object looks a bit better for what Austin calls middle-sized pieces of dry goods than it does for numbers, fictional characters, and so on. I mean, if you say the only prime between 81 and 127 has the property phi, and I say, yeah, which number is that? Well, that's analogous to the guy in the railroad car. I'm asking, which one shall I look to, whom shall I answer to, when I decide whether to ascribe or withhold description of phi-ness. Somehow it strikes me as less convincing with the numbers than it does with the spatio-temporal occupants. And I have a feeling that the issue boils down to, I want to treat, as I'm going to say in a lecture tomorrow, I want to treat physical objects on the model of numbers. Kant wanted, starting from space-time occupants as paradigmatic objects, to treat intentional objects of any description, numbers, Sherlock Holmes, round squares, you name it, as occupants of, values of the variable x, and the transcendental object equals x. And it's as if I wanted to downgrade the physical objects by comparing them to numbers. He wanted to upgrade the numbers by comparing them to physical objects. How is one supposed to resolve that kind of controversy? This isn't very helpful, but I'm just trying to explore the implications of these different strategies. I suppose what I want to do is find a vocabulary for saying, look, none of these things would be available were it not for the mighty human poetic imagination. So, I want to keep them in their place as, just just things that we toss off in our poetic exuberance. People who are what I call authoritarian want to remind us of our finitude, the need for humility, stuff like that. And so they want to give them a dignity, if only that of the transcendental object equals X, which preserves notions like their having authority, answerability to, responsibility to, and stuff like that. So I'm inclined to think, if, like Kant and perhaps you, one is impressed by the natural sciences as a paradigm of human activity, you may well sort of dignify the physical objects described and explained by the natural sciences as, though of course they only have their authority derivative from our practices, nonetheless they got real authority. Taking literary creation to be the central human activity, am inclined to say, yeah, I can see what they mean. You got to give your account of Sherlock Holmes. You got to get Sherlock Holmes right, but for God's sake, Sherlock Holmes is just one of the sparks we throw off. So are the protons. So are so is whatever. And so let's not have these facts about protons sitting around the universe any more than facts about Sherlock Holmes sitting around the universe.
John? Just while you're willing to express it, at least simply being moved by the frenzied exaltation of the human.
Can you speak a little louder?
You talked about the frenzied exaltation of the human as maybe the only thing that's really reluctant to say, well, it's all right, talk that way if you want. I think you can have that. Consistently with the really thinned down, abstract, structural, bare bones Kantian story that Bob is giving you. These transcendental objects equals X. It, the transcendental object equals X, whatever. Who knows how many there are? It doesn't look like much of a human being, because the only position that it figures in these responsibility structures is the position of that to which the other one, the transcendental subject, has responsibility. There's not supposed to be any suggestion that the transcendental object equals X is itself in turn, unless it happens to be, another one of us, another one of the wonderful to be exalted humans. A locus of responsibility. So there's already in his picture the sharp distinction between loci of responsibility, which are special and wonderful, and only human beings are those. That talk will extend, if you like, derivatively to dogs and cats and computers, and we don't really care too much how far. But the other side of it is it just sits there. It's not wonderful in any way. It's not in any way assimilated to the feats of achievement that the human experience is capable of, all that. To talk in this way of it as that to which thinkers are responsible. So I think he's not asking you to give up the exaltation of the human in pushing the Kantian structure at you.
Yeah, it's, I still have this feeling that, it's, it is sort of like, being a transcendental idealist but an empirical realist. You're sort of a transcendental idealist for one audience and an empirical realist for the other. And, talking to me, Bob is in his transcendental idealist exaltation of the human mode. Talking to the other guys, he's in his, lots of facts out there, doing their heavy lifting, making things true, stuff like that. And, I think it got Kant into trouble. I think it's going to get him into trouble. problem than it. Yeah.
I'm a little confused. I guess the question is, well, I'm a little puzzled about something that you say. I'm a little puzzled about something that Bob says. In both cases, I'm having trouble fitting in with other things you both say. Fighting for what metaphors to use is important. There's no issue between anyone here about that. It's a lot hangs on which metaphors to use to try and literalize the vocabulary you're at. So the idea of authority seems, or answerability and authority go together. You're answerable to something, investing with an authority of some kind. It's hard for you to see how something that doesn't, in one form or other, speak has authority, so that it can present a claim or something that you can answer to. How can be invested with authority, or should be invested with authority. So, how I would think of this settling the train compartment scenario. I make a claim about somebody, and you're not sure about whom I'm speaking, so you're not sure what to do with my claim. How do you go about deciding what to do with my claim? And I guess I'm getting to my confusion about what Bob said first. Bob says, well, you consult things. And it's part of our practice that how you settle this is you find out which thing to consult, and you check with that thing to determine what stand you should take on the claim. And it's possible to reconstruct a sort of innocuous notion of answerability to things rooted in our practice that way. And I guess it's surprising that Bob went that way, because it seems to me that if you're thinking of beliefs or whatever as rules for action, what we want to do is say something like, well, you ask me some guiding questions, and I provide you with possible actions that you can perform, and my obligation is to try and present you with possible actions that, by performing which, you'll be in a position to take a stand, the sort of stand that I'm recommending. So the answerability here is something between us. I'm answerable to you, having made the claim, in the sense that I'm going to try and provide you with strategies for action, rules for action, beliefs, that will make it possible for you to come to endorse my claim. And of course, those strategies are going to involve getting yourself in relation to certain objects. But answerability doesn't characterize the relation between you and object, or me and object, but it's between us. So I would have thought that would be the direction that Bob would have defended the notion of answerability, rather than making it characteristic of the relation between you and the thing, or me and the thing. So that's why I was a little confused about what Bob said. Now here's why I was confused about what you said at some point in your paper. Because I thought you said that you want to endorse the alternative on page 21. The alternative is to take them as about things, but not as answering to anything. So I would have thought, yeah, you don't want answering to things, but you do want answering to people, don't you? I mean, it's hard to, as long as there's going to be a question about whether an application, a particular application of a term or a sentence or a vocabulary, as long as there are questions about whether that application is sound, good, reasonable, appropriate, there's a notion of answerability there. If normativity and answerability seem to me to kind of be inseparable. So why do you want to drop it all together? I would have thought you wanted to insist that answerability has got to be contained to human relations. And we don't want to use metaphors that confer authority on things, because things don't speak. The world doesn't speak its own language, and so on and so forth. Right? Avoid all that. But I don't see why you would want to get rid of answerability altogether, because it seems to me that in discourse we do precisely make ourselves answerable to each other in a very straightforward way. I make a claim and you say you doubt it, well then I got to provide you with some good actions that you can perform. If we're talking about so-called empirical matters, for example, that you can try out and see by putting yourself in interaction with relevant objects in that kind of way, whether you don't come to think as I do. Well, if you don't, then I haven't I haven't answered to the obligation I undertook by making that claim. That doesn't seem to me a problematic way of speaking.
Yeah, I see what you mean, and I see what's wrong with the way I put it on 21. What I was trying to do on 21 was to say that I take Davidson's picture to be something like, some people think that that you should analyze intentionality as a relation between a linguistic and a non-linguistic entity. Some people think you should analyze intentionality as a relation among linguistic entities. I mean, to put it crudely, some people think intentionality is directed to something which is outside the conceptual linguistic realm. Some people think it's only directed to other things within that realm. I take Davidson to be saying, forget this question, and don't say it's directed toward other opinions. Don't say it's directed beyond opinions, or shoots the human realm into the very world itself. Don't use this metaphor, just as you mustn't think of the word true as naming a relation between either linguistic entities inter se or the linguistic and the non-linguistic, so you mustn't think of aboutness as naming a relation between either of these two alternative things it might name a relation between. Don't think of or about as needing to be spelled out in terms of what relation has to obtain for a statement to be about something. Just watch the use made of the term of and about in linguistic practices, like, what are you talking about, that guy over there, which number did you have in mind, 97, stuff like that, and forget, direction, relation, answers, stuff like that. Leave the word above, leave the word about or of as bare and naked and useful as the word true. So don't say, as Bob does, if you got intentionality, you got representationality automatically. Don't say, as I quote him as saying on 16 and 17, the representationalist semantic tradition embodies an undeniable insight. Whatever is propositionally contentful does necessarily have such a representational aspect. Don't say that whatever is about something must be thought of as answering to that thing as having authority over it, that thing as needing to be consulted about it, that thing as being represented, hoping to correspond to that thing, and so on. Just, drop the whole set of locutions and let ofness stand on its own. Anyway, that was the line I wanted, but I made it sound on 21, as you point out, that I didn't even want you to talk to I didn't even want you to ask people questions like, which number did you have in mind, which guy were you talking about? So of course I do. That's what you do when you ask. That's what you want when you ask questions like, who are you talking about?
I would like to give you an example of something, and then you explain it in pragmatist terms. When lions hunt, often one lion will chase a herd of antelope. before it starts chasing them, a second lion will go around and hide behind a rock or something. And when the first one starts chasing them, at a certain moment, the hidden one stands up and stampedes the herd towards the one who is chasing, and a kill is often made. Now, I don't know what these lions are doing, how they get the timing correct, whether they think about whether they're hiding themselves. But something has to take place in which there's some sort of accurate, I don't know what to call it, I don't want to use judgment, but some sort of accurate estimation of how these animals are going to behave and when the hidden lion should stand up to get the desired results. Now, when you discarded the word truth, you talked about which description fit better for our social practices. Would you say the same thing of lions, or what is going on there? Because now we can't talk about at least human social practices. I mean, but there is some sense of if the lion misjudges the time or misjudges the way he jumps on the animal or something, he doesn't make the kill and he's not successful. So how do we describe that?
The obvious alternative ways of describing it are, in the usual intentional terms. The lions agree among themselves that, the antelopes will flee in the direction opposite to the one from which lion B is coming, so lion A goes in that direction, stuff like that. Or if you feel like it, if you don't want to talk intentional about the lions, you can try to find some way of talking as you do about, slightly more simple-minded organisms. The chameleon turns the given color when, a given predator comes along. It gets eaten anyway because it's the wrong predator. I mean, that predator is not deceived by that particular color change. Well, you could say the chameleon thought it was predator A, but it was actually predator B. Or you could just say, the light glancing off the scales of predator A always causes the, changes in the chromatophores of the skin of the, something or other. And, I don't think it matters which you say.
No, my idea was, though, there's some sense in which whether the lion's judgment of these, you don't want to use the word facts, brute facts, is either accurate or not accurate. And yet, you seem to want to drop all these kinds of words. That's all.
No,
and yet, are you willing then to say, well, the lions can talk about this for their own social purposes? I mean, that's what you seem to say first. The social purposes of the lion is to make the kill to eat. In other words, the lion has a choice, and it can misjudge at the timing to show itself or when to make the jump, or et cetera, et cetera. So there's some sense in which the lion has to judge these facts, whether it really is well hidden, whether the antelopes really will turn in this direction when it stands up, etc. In other words, it's a little bit the question of answerability, I think, except I was switching it into a non-human realm because all your talks seem to be about answerability in terms of a human making some sort of statement about what there is or whatever. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah, well, maybe I do, maybe I don't. I'm inclined to say, yeah, you can think of the lions doing it that way. You can think of the record changer having to make a decision about whether this is a 33 or a 78 RPM record that it's going to come down on, and sometimes getting it right and getting it wrong. You can think of things in roughly anthropomorphic ways or in roughly non-anthropomorphic ways, and it doesn't matter much.
I don't think you can explain that kind of behavior in non-anthropomorphic ways. I mean, there seems to be some sort of a judgment there. It can't, because the animal is actually taking advantage of certain rocks or something that would not be the same in every situation. So you can't say it's instinct or mechanical behavior like a record changer. You
can. I mean, it seems to me that's just what we pay the biologists to do, to sort of break down the anthropomorphizable behavior into little hunks and view it mechanically, just like we pay them to take our psychology and put it in neurological terms. They have more success with moths and chameleons than they do with lions, because lions are bigger and more complicated, and so on. But my main point is that as long as you see the two ways of describing the thing as as long as you don't think much turns on whether the biologists come up with an alternative to the anthropomorphization for the lions, if they do, fine. If they don't, fine. So what? This is the pragmatic view that as long as you have all kinds of different ways of talking about lions adaptable for one or another human purpose, you don't worry about which ones gets the lion right. What I'm having trouble with, my present interlocutors is, we got this poetry-centered, anti-authoritarian vocabulary, which eschews all this stuff about facts, answerability, so on the one hand, and we got the somewhat more commonsensical, be kind to the transcendental object vocabulary floating around, and how do you, why am I making such a big fuss about the choice between them? And the only answer I can give is, well, if philosophy is worth doing, it's only worth doing to shove culture off in a new direction, and here's a new direction.
Can I ask one question that is vaguely related? When you talked about your frenzied exaltation of the human, I suppose you use that phrase to contrast it with an exaltation of a non-human in terms of a god or something like that.
Yeah.
But if you talk about the non-human in terms of all the rest of living creation, do you have any grounds then for talking about the exaltation of the human? Are you going to say because humans can write literature, that's sufficient grounds for exalting them above?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I take it that most philosophers are in the business of exalting human beings one way or another. The tradition has exalted them because you can make scientists out of them, and I'm exalting them because you can make poets out of them.
But do you think that exaltation in the end leads to better social practices?
Yeah, that's my guess anyway. Yeah, it doesn't do much for the lions either way. If you exalt us as scientists, we murder to dissect. If you exalt us as poets, we encage to provide poetic material. The lions are left in the lurch.
But if we think that we're the things for which everything else exists, so to speak, it seems we have an attitude then that we can pollute the world, we can use whatever we want in whatever way, and that ultimately it becomes a destructive human activity, and that it works to our detriment, precisely because we've exalted ourselves too much.
Well, I wouldn't say precisely because we've exalted ourselves too much. I would say that there are two questions. Does any non-human have any rights that trump any human inconvenience? And is our attitude toward the rest of nature stabbing ourselves in the back? The answer to the first might be no, and the answer to the second might still be yes. And I talk about this in what has now become the last of these lectures, a paper called Justice as a Larger Loyalty, where I discuss, how you decide who's one of us. Do you enlarge the circle to let in the lions, or do you enclose it to close off the atheists and stuff like that? And basically, what I'm arguing is, as wealth, security, and leisure seem more possible, you enlarge more and more, which is why you get societies for the prevention of cruelty to animals only in rich countries. And the tougher things come, the more you close it down. And,
Yeah.
To me, there's something behind these resistant changes, and I can't seem to figure out what's going on with this pragmatism. But one thing I think is going on is that there is, in your way of thinking, and also you've shown it in traditional pragmatic thinking, God, in some way, has a big place. I mean, it's important. This non-human reality, whether it's God or reality, it's important. And fleeing from this non-human reality, which is the way to relate to this is authoritarian. To be anti-authoritarian is just to relate on human beings. And that should make social practices better. But you do not offer us any thinking about social practices. It seems like you jump from empiricism or relating to God, relating to a reality which is non-human, directly to imagination and aesthetics. Whereas, as I see the change from, for instance, Kant to Hegel, is a change from this either-or, aesthetics and natural science, to a human social reality. That's what Hegel and later Marx and all the rest of them for the first time thought of. That was thinking social reality and dynamics which goes on within social practices. And when you're so concerned about social practices, you want to sell a message, which is pragmatism, a new civilization, a new self-consciousness, which we should buy. Okay, I'm afraid to buy this. If you do not specify what I get, instead of just literature and imagination, if you do not specify what do you think about intersocial practices, because my way of thinking anti-authoritarianism is the European way. It's between people. And until now, I mean, between people there are authorities and there are people which are subdued and repressed and all that things. And until now, you have given no criteria whatsoever how we should combat human authority. I mean, actually, the only thing you have said until now is that, well, if the students come to you, they'll just have to rely on you as being a better person. There's no criteria. And I won't buy a message which do not give me something else to rely on. I mean, if I have to give up truth, which you use in all kinds of contexts, political, social contexts, truth is a very strong metaphor. And it's not just a relation to a non-human reality, it's a relation you use between human beings, in courtroom, in political things, when you show people that this was what you did. This is not how the world is, but this is what you did. This is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. So truth is an important thing. I'm not just giving up that if I don't know what I get. And your anti-authoritarianism, do not give me anything for people. It's only epistemological. You don't think social practices?
Well, when I said yesterday in some point or other that Mill's On Liberty might be all the ethical instruction you need, and quoted the epigraph to On Liberty as the only point of this book is, and the only point of human society is the encouragement of human diversity. What I was trying to suggest was the kind of social utopia which Mill envisages is one in which Nietzschean poetic self-creation is put within the use of all the members of the society. That, you know, the liberal democratic utopia is one in which people are free to make themselves up in the sense in which poets paradigmatically make themselves up, and that what you want out of this kind of social democratic utopia is everybody their own poet. That's the connection I see between sort of shifting the center of culture from science to literature, or the political implication that I see in shifting the center of culture from science to literature. It seems to me that authoritarianism in the more familiar political sense tends to consist in people saying, I have a correct scientific understanding of the nature of society, so I will, let me use my scientific knowledge to run things for you. And I take it that Mill is offering us an alternative to that, as is Rawls. So I don't think it's utterly without, resonance for political matters. On the question of, swearing to tell the truth and so on, no pragmatist, classical or contemporary, wants to give up the standard social, practices of physics, jurisprudence, seeking the truth in physics, seeking the truth in the courtroom, and so on. I mean, this is all meta second-level stuff in that we don't have any specific suggestions about how to change physics departments, courtrooms, anything like that. So as far as I can see, you just divide through by what happens in courtrooms, and,
But if philosophy, like poetry, delivers vocabulary for the rest of society, it should have some responsibility if it takes all the value out of a good old term like truth.
Not if it, puts the value on some other good old terms like, social solidarity, fraternity, stuff like that. I mean, the only point of saying we all have a civic duty not to commit perjury, to render honest judgment as members of juries, to, not take bribes if we're judges and so on, is to, have human beings treat each other decently. And well, to use an example I used in another paper, it used to be the case that atheists couldn't testify in court because, what did they have to be afraid of? They could lie and nothing would happen. They didn't think anything would happen to them. So obviously they couldn't be trusted to tell the truth. Gradually customs changed, and nobody now cares whether you swear or affirm or anything because, it's thought, you think of oath-taking as a matter of civic relation to fellow citizens. You don't think of it as a relation to the deity. I'm suggesting if you don't think of truth as a relation to reality and think of it in terms of your relation to fellow citizens, you'll be okay. It won't do you any more harm than worrying about whether atheists get to testify.
I think that this debate has an ethical character, and I have, in a sense, ethical question. I like your anti-authoritarian very much, but I have a doubt if imperative of being always anti-authoritarian is not authoritarian by itself. So I have always the same question. Can a real pragmatist be always consistent?
Always.
Always consistent or consequent? Because someone can say that the radical authoritarianism can be a mirror reflection of authoritarianism.
Yeah. No, I think there's always this danger in any vaguely revolutionary movement that you get so doctrinaire in your revolutionary rhetoric that you make life more difficult than it has to be. And that, that's perhaps what I'm doing in what Bob describes as saying, I will not allow you ever to refer to facts or representations again. I don't think there's much to be said about the general paradox that you got to find some way to nudge people in the right direction without inconveniencing them, and it's a hard middle ground. It's what Dewey said in that passage about he said the trouble with aggressive atheism is that the atheist is so concerned to wipe out all traces of the religious consciousness that it becomes a new church, a new dogmatism. It doesn't ask about human happiness. It asks about the purity of the individual soul. Has it cleansed itself of all traces of these bad things? So Dewey was saying, let's not be aggressive atheists. Let's not be aggressive monotheists. Let's be like-minded, tolerant polytheists. And so I suppose my appropriate attitude is, let 1,000 varieties of pragmatism bloom. There's Brandon's representationalist. I mean, he's soft on representations, but that's okay. And McDowell is soft on experience, but there's.
Well, I understand that you praise autonomy. And since it comes to politics and to social action and organization, then my question is, well, individual autonomy is very good, but you have to presuppose that individuals are capable of putting into practice this autonomy. I mean, with your ideas of not having some authority above us, with these ideas, I do think that rich people are better served in our society than poor people. Because the rich, well, they don't have someone above them to whom respond, and they can stand on their own. What about the poor?
If I understand your point, I mean, I guess I just agree that the less power, freedom, leisure, whatnot you have, the poorer you are, the more desperately you need to ally yourself with something which gives you some kind of status, like being in the truth or being on God's side, or
for instance, something like God is on my side.
Yeah, right. Yeah, and if
I know that that's not.
Yeah, and if you're a poverty-stricken atheist, at least truth is on your side. Yeah. I think anti-authoritarianism only makes sense in the world in which Dewey thought that democracy made sense. Possibly under an illusion, he thought that technology had given us a way to prevent wage slavery, to prevent poverty, to produce classlessness, and in the American 1920s this had a certain plausibility. Maybe it doesn't have any plausibility anymore, but for the purposes of this line of argument, I'm saying the utopia which came into view in the 100 years or so after the Enlightenment was one in which self-creation wasn't the privilege of Nietzschean nobles, but was the privilege of all members of democratic societies. And a classless egalitarian society with no rich or poor may be delusional, but it's the best utopia anybody's thought of yet, so why not write your philosophies in terms of that utopia?
I have a question about something that Björn referred to just before. your concept of answerability, well, the way you put it so bright on this page 21 of the page today, somehow I read this concept of answerability, well, seeing that you try to put away all kind of reference to responsibility or authority or whatever. So somehow this concept of answerability that you work with could be read as a concept away from ethics or from any kind of ethical discourse. But well, this is only a presupposition. Then if I go on thinking on this line, I see that it's not possible that you're talking on this line, because on the other hand, you come up with concepts like the ones you came up now with, like solidarity or fraternity or whatsoever. But then I have a problem with this concept of solidarity and fraternity, and it is more or less in the line of what Ricardo was talking about now. Because on the one hand, you don't want to stand as an authority in any sense of the word, but on the other hand, you talk about ethical concepts like fraternity and solidarity. And then my question is, on which grounds do you speak about solidarity and fraternity? Because it seems to me that it is a kind, you speak about, you use those terms in a very, in senso lato, but not in senso stricto, so to speak. So that this solidarity and fraternity you speak about seems to me to point out to a kind of cooperativistical ethics.
To a kind of?
I don't know if it is the word, how do you say, cooperativistical ethics, where you use a kind of ethical discourse within a community.
Cooperation.
Like, yes, I mean, we talk about, cooperativistical ethics between doctors or between nurses or between philosophers or whatever. So it seems to me that this kind of discourse you come up with in ethical terms, when you speak about solidarity and fraternity, is a kind of, nevertheless, discriminative discourse somehow. And in this sense, in that sense, it can be authoritarian upon other ethical discourses.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, if my utopia comes into existence, it means a lot of other people's utopias aren't going to come into existence. I mean, everybody's authoritarian in that sense, and that, something's got to give.
Maybe it was too obvious, but I mean, it was making me a problem, to your point, to your concept of that.
I mean, I think that, there's a kind of romantic anarchism which suggests that someday there will never be power, someday there will never be exclusion, someday I don't know, all these funny things will happen, and that isn't what I mean by romanticism.
No, but I was not taking it like this way.
But in fact, you are not trying to change the world, are you?
Well,